Good evening. I'm Shai, Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law. I work at iCourts, the Center of Excellence for International Courts and Governance. And today I want to speak about my new book, Elites, Power Struggles in the Law, How Courts Support Diffuse Interest, which was published this month by Routledge. I thank Professor Giuseppe Montenico for inviting me to present this book at Dritte Comparati. Throughout most of human history, it was clear that most of the power, all of it, was held by a very small group of people. Kings, emperors, princes, they controlled everything, and most of the public had almost no political power. But around 200 years ago, this started to change, and countries started to shift towards democracies. Slowly at first, there were no perfect democracies, but they started to go in this direction. And the literature started to say now a lot of the power is held by most of the public, by a majority. In fact, maybe we even have to be afraid of the majority, of the tyranny of the majority, and how it will affect minorities. So this changed the focus of the literature from focusing on small concentrated groups that control most of the power to focusing on the general public. But not everybody was convinced. Around 60 years ago, Malcolm Olson, a very famous economist, wrote a book that had a very revolutionary thesis. He said that even in a fully functional democracy, most of the power is held by small groups, concentrated interest groups, and diffuse interest groups. The rest of the public has much less power. Now, why is that? In a democracy, everybody has just one vote. But what Malcolm Olson said was that these small groups can control politicians because they can work very well together. Let's take a simple example. The sugar market in the United States is held by just a few families. Let's say 300 people control it. And these 300 people control $3 billion every year that they get extra because of subsidies that they get from the government, because of tariffs that push the price to 3 times what it should be. All these $3 billion goes to just less than 300 people, probably much less. So every one of them gets $10 million. For $10 million, they would do anything, right? They would spend their careers on that. They would pay politicians, help their campaigns, write letters, go on demonstrations, do everything they need. If you look at the rest of the public, there's 300 million people in the US. So every one of them pays just $10 more for sugar every year. For $10, they would not go on demonstrations or change political alliances, or in fact, they would not even be aware of that because they will not invest the necessary effort to get informed. Now, this means that concentrated interest can control what happens in a functional democracy like the United States. Now, when I read this theory first, I was not fully convinced because in functional democracies that are successful, usually not all the public lives in abject poverty. So there must be some countervening elements. And some of them I found in a book by Gunnar Trumbull just from a few years ago that says that even diffuse interests can come together and because they have an organizing narrative that is legitimate and they can fight for their rights in some cases. It says in some cases. What cases? We don't know. So I started to think about courts because that is the main subject that I wrote about in several other books. And I figured out that national and international courts are exactly a crucial element, maybe not the only one, but a very important element, supporting diffuse interests and helping them. Now, why is that? There are 2 reasons mainly. One is that courts are depending on public legitimacy. So whereas elected bodies many times are facing extortion by special interests that can help to fund them and can control them in a variety of ways, courts really need to have the support of the general public. So even if the judges are rich and affluent and come from elites and have ideologies that are elitist, if the court would go in this way, they would lose legitimacy. So either they would understand that and avoid it, which we many times do, or if they would really support the elite, there is going to be a backlash. And there are many examples of that. And this backlash will push the court down, its legitimacy will decrease, and then it will not be able to function effectively anymore. So the first reason is that there's a strong pressure on courts to support diffuse interest, and if they don't do that, they're going to be penalized. The second element is that even if courts sometimes go against diffuse interest or give judgments that are neutral in this respect, the very action of litigation before the court and the process of adjudication can help diffuse interest. Now, in order to understand why, we need to understand what is the main difficulty or weakness of diffuse interest. What makes diffuse interest weak is the fact that they are uninformed, because they don't have an incentive to pay the price of getting informed, and they're unmotivated to act, because if they act, a lot of people are going to gain, but everybody's going to gain very, very little, so nobody has an incentive not to free ride and to fight for the group. So what courts are doing is they're getting people informed, because they create friction between the other political parties, and they diffuse information throughout the group, and that's something very healthy because it makes diffuse interest more informed. Even more informed, they are likely to fight for their rights. The second element is that it gets diffuse interest motivated to act. Why does it get them motivated? Because it makes them think about the interests as rights, as something they are entitled to, something that we should fight for. And because of these two reasons, courts help diffuse interest. Now, what the book does is it goes through a very long series of case studies and examples and judgments from both national courts and international courts and proves this thesis. And this is why I think it's going to be of interest to anybody that is interested in the impact of courts in society.